Robb Stark stood atop the walls of River Run, the wind biting through his fur cloak, carrying the scent of pine and distant smoke. The war had gone differently this time. His banners, the dire wolf on gray, fluttered proudly over the lands he now controlled. The Lannisters, crushed and scattered, no longer held sway over the Riverlands, and word had reached him that King's Landing itself was vulnerable. His army, still loyal despite the harsh winters and bloody battles, looked to him with hope and even fear. He was young, not yet 20, but the victories had aged him in ways a quiet life in Winterfell never could. He had learned the cost of every decision, the weight of every life, and the treacheries of men. Every choice had brought him here. His marriage to a Frey had secured alliances, but it had been more than politics. It had been a test of his patience, his ability to see beyond hatred. The Red Wedding had been avoided, his uncle's warnings heeded. The treachery that once would have ended his life now only strengthened his resolve. He remembered his father's words, Jon Arryn's lessons, and the faces of the men who had died believing in him. They had all fought for a future they would never see. Robb would make sure their deaths mattered. Word came to him that Tywin Lannister's forces were regrouping, trying to reclaim the Riverlands. Robb's mind raced. He had to be clever, not just strong. Every move would count. He called his commanders, men who had bled with him through the Red Fork, and laid out a plan that was bold and dangerous. Ambushes, feints, and strategic retreats, they would fight smarter than ever. Robb was learning quickly that brute force alone could not win wars. Cunning, patience, and the understanding of human weakness mattered as much as swords and shields. That night, he walked the battlements alone, the moon high and silver over the river. He thought of his mother, Catelyn, and how her fierce love had shaped him. He thought of his siblings in Winterfell, growing up in the shadow of his victories. Would they accept him as king one day? Would the North bend to his will, proud and stubborn as it was? He felt the weight of expectations pressing down on him, heavier than any armor. Yet there was a thrill in it too, a fire that made him feel alive. This was what leadership felt like. Not just victory, but responsibility, danger, and the knowledge that one misstep could undo everything. Morning came, and Robb rode out with his generals. The Riverlands were alive with preparations. Villages sent food and weapons, lords pledged their men, and whispers of his victory spread faster than ravens could fly. Robb knew the people feared the chaos the Lannisters had left behind, but they also feared what a Stark in control might bring. A ruler had to be both feared and loved, he had realized, and walking that line was the hardest part of all. The first clash came at a narrow pass near the Red Fork. Robb's scouts had reported Lannister reinforcements, thinking themselves clever. But Robb was cleverer. The battle was brutal and short. Robb's men, disciplined and fierce, cut through their enemies, not with mindless rage, but with precision. Every strike counted, every position held, every retreat planned. By nightfall, the Lannisters were in retreat once more, and Robb Stark stood victorious again. Yet, in the quiet moments after the battle, he felt no triumph, only the lingering weight of lives lost, and the awareness that this war, no matter how many victories he gained, was far from over. As he looked over the blood-soaked ground, Robb realized that winning battles was one thing. Winning the war and the people's loyalty would be the true test. And in that cold, still night, beneath the same silver moon, he promised himself that he would not fail. Westeros would remember the name of Robb Stark not as a boy who died too young, but as the wolf who rose and refused to bow. The morning was crisp, and the Riverlands stretched out like a quilt of green and gold beneath Robb Stark's eyes. His army moved with purpose, banners snapping in the wind, the sound of hooves and marching men echoing off the hills. Rumors had reached him that King's Landing was weak, that Cersei Lannister's grip on the throne was slipping. The city was full of schemers and whispers, and Robb knew better than to underestimate them. Every step toward the capital was a step into a nest of vipers. But he also knew he couldn't hesitate. Hesitation meant death in war, and Robb had seen enough of that already. He rode at the head of his army, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. Every soldier looked to him, every eye measured him. expecting guidance, expecting courage. Some were young boys, barely men, who had been thrown into the horrors of battle. Others were hardened veterans, scarred by years of fighting, who trusted him because he had proven himself time and time again. Robb had become more than a leader. He was a symbol of wolf who would not bow. The march was not easy. The roads were narrow and the countryside still bore the scars of the war that had nearly destroyed them. Villages were burned, crops trampled, families scattered. Robb's presence inspired hope, but the memory of what had come before was still fresh. He made a point to meet with the people along the way, speaking to farmers, blacksmiths, and soldiers alike. He offered protection, justice, and a chance for the North and Riverlands to stand together. But he also knew that fear lingered. Fear of the Starks, fear of war, fear of what might happen if a young wolf claimed the Iron Throne. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Robb held council with his commanders in a forest clearing. Maps were spread, ravens brought news from spies, and strategies were debated. His uncle Edmure spoke cautiously, worried that marching too quickly toward King's Landing would leave them exposed. But Robb's mind was already several moves ahead. He proposed splitting the army, sending a portion to harass supply lines while the main force pressed on the roads toward the capital. A kingdom ruled by fear is easy to take, but a city full of schemers is deadly, he said. His words carried authority, and though some hesitated, they followed him. At night, when the campfires burned low and the men slept, Robb walked among them. He listened to their whispers, shared jokes to ease their nerves, and felt the pulse of his army. This was more than a march. It was a living, breathing force that trusted him with life and death. The weight of that trust was almost unbearable, but Robb had learned that true strength came not from swords alone, but from understanding the hearts of men. As they approached the outskirts of the Westerlands, news came of Tywin Lannister's movements. The Lion of Casterly Rock was sending forces to intercept them, hoping to trap Robb between his armies and the city walls. The young wolf smiled, a sharp, calculating grin. He had expected this. He ordered his forces to take the hills overlooking the valley, using the terrain to their advantage. When the Lannisters attacked, they were met not with chaos but with a disciplined force, striking with precision and timing that left the enemy reeling. By nightfall, the Lannisters were retreating, and Robb's forces held the high ground. Victory was sweet, but fleeting. Robb knew that King's Landing awaited, full of enemies far more dangerous than soldiers, politicians, spies, and a queen who would do anything to hold power. He felt the weight of the Iron Throne calling to him, a prize that promised glory but also endless peril. And yet, he was ready. Every battle had taught him something new, every death had hardened him, and every victory had sharpened his mind. The wolf was no longer just a boy of Winterfell. He was a force that Westeros would never forget. That night, as he looked up at the stars, Robb whispered to himself, "The North remembers, and soon, all of Westeros will remember too." He did not sleep easily, for the road ahead was treacherous, but his resolve burned brighter than any fear. The Iron Throne awaited, and Robb Stark would not fail. The walls of King's Landing loomed in the distance, gray and imposing, catching the last rays of the sun. Robb Stark's army paused outside the city, spreading across the hills like a living tide. The Red Keep rose above the rest of the city like a crown of stone, and Robb felt the weight of what lay ahead. This was no ordinary battle. This was a fight for the heart of Westeros itself. Soldiers, spies, and even the people inside the city could turn the tide with a single word. Every step had to be measured, every decision precise. Robb called his council again, this time under the cover of night. Maps of the city and its surrounding countryside were spread across a wooden table, candles flickering against the wind. Tyrion Lannister had already been captured earlier in a clever ambush, and Robb held him in a guarded tent. The dwarf's sharp mind was now an unwilling advisor. Robb questioned him about the city's defenses, the loyalties of its lords, and the queen's plans. Tyrion's answers were cautious, measured, but they revealed cracks in Cersei's control. Robb realized that brute force alone would not win the city. Cunning, deceit, and manipulation would be just as important. The next morning, Robb positioned his army around the city in a tight perimeter, cutting off supply routes and blocking reinforcements. His cavalry patrolled the outskirts while archers took positions on the hills. The city was tense, the citizens whispering in the streets about the approaching wolf. Robb knew fear was a weapon as much as any sword. He sent letters into the city offering leniency to those who would surrender and warning that resistance would be punished. The messages were delivered under banners of peace, but everyone knew the consequences of defiance. Cersei, confident in her walls and her city guards, underestimated the wolf. She sent envoys to negotiate, hoping to buy time. Robb, however, was patient. He remembered the lessons of the Red Wedding that never was and the treachery of his enemies. He would not be caught off guard. He replied through Tyrion, proposing a meeting in the outskirts of the city. The queen would come, but so would spies and guards, and every move would be watched. Robb needed to know who could be trusted and who would betray him. When the meeting finally happened, the tension was palpable. Cersei arrived in a gilded carriage, flanked by knights, her expression carefully composed. Robb stepped forward, young but commanding, and greeted her with respect, hiding the steel behind his words. The negotiation was a dance of words, each trying to find weakness in the other. Cersei demanded that the North return to its lands, that the Riverlands remain under her control. Robb refused, his voice calm but firm. The North and the Riverlands will not kneel to tyrants, he said, and the Queen's eyes narrowed. Tyrion's whispered advice had been invaluable. Robb had learned of secret passages, weak points in the walls, and disloyal soldiers within the city. That night, under the cover of darkness, small units moved silently, slipping inside the city to create chaos, setting fires, and cutting off communication between the Red Keep and the rest of King's Landing. The roar of alarm bells filled the air, and panic spread quickly. Citizens fled their homes, guards scrambled to respond, and the Queen's confidence began to crumble. Robb watched from the hills, the fires casting a flickering glow over the city. He felt no fear, only the thrill of strategy unfolding perfectly. Every move was calculated, every risk measured. This was not just war. This was chess, and he was already thinking 5 moves ahead. Yet, beneath his calm, he knew the hardest test was yet to come. The city was strong, and Cersei would not surrender easily. Allies could turn traitor, soldiers could falter, and one misstep could undo everything. As the first rays of dawn touched the walls, Robb gathered his commanders. "Tonight," he said, "we strike at the heart of King's Landing. The city fears us, and fear is our ally. But remember this, every life we take shapes the future. We do not kill blindly. We take what is ours, and we show that a Stark will rule, not a Lannister." His words carried through the ranks, and the men understood the gravity of the moment. The wolf was at the city's doorstep, and the time for waiting had ended. Night fell over King's Landing, thick and heavy, cloaking the city in shadows. Robb Stark's forces moved quietly through the hills, the sounds of the city, the clatter of guards, the distant cries of frightened citizens reaching his ears like music to a predator. The fires set by his covert units glowed faintly in the streets, smoke curling upward and sending the city into confusion. It was time. The wolf would strike at the heart of the city. Robb led the first wave, a small group of elite soldiers who knew the streets from Tyrion's maps. They slipped through narrow alleys, avoiding patrols, setting small fires to draw the guards' attention away from the Red Keep. Every step was tense. Every corner could hide a traitor or an ambush. But his men trusted him, and that trust was the sharpest weapon he had. The city was alive with fear, whispers spreading of the young wolf who had come to claim the throne. Robb used that fear, letting it ripple through the enemy before the first sword was even drawn. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei paced, her face tight with worry. She had heard rumors of fires, of sabotage, and of soldiers moving in ways her guards could not predict. Her council urged caution, but she refused to hide behind her walls. She believed in the strength of the city and in her own cunning. Yet even she could feel the grip of panic tightening. The North and the Riverlands were not just marching on the gates. They were inside her mind, threatening every plan she had laid for survival. Robb's forces struck in the dead of night, moving swiftly and silently. The gates of the city were weak in places, and the infiltrators exploited every weakness. Guards were cut down silently, or captured before they could raise alarms. Fires flared in the streets, drawing attention and panic as Robb's men pressed forward. Chaos spread, and in that chaos, the wolf moved with precision. He did not allow his men to pillage indiscriminately. Every action was calculated, every life taken a blow against the Lannisters' control, but not wasted. From the walls, the city's defenders tried to organize, but the combination of inside attacks, fires, and fear made coordination nearly impossible. Robb's army began to pour into the streets, meeting resistance only briefly before crushing it with superior strategy and discipline. The citizens, unsure who to fear, the invading army or their own rulers, stayed hidden, and that silence worked in Robb's favor. He moved like a shadow through the city, directing his commanders, responding to every surprise, and anticipating every counterattack. At the Red Keep, the Queen realized the heart of the city was no longer under her control. Tyrion had given Robb the secret passages that allowed them to bypass many of the outer defenses. Robb himself had approached the gates of the keep, flanked by his most trusted men. The moonlight glinted off his sword, and the wind carried the distant cries of battle. This was the moment that would decide everything: the throne or defeat. The first clash inside the Red Keep was brutal. Steel rang against steel as Robb's men fought the guards, each movement a mix of skill and desperation. Robb himself cut down a knight who lunged too quickly, his sword finding its mark with precision. The young wolf was no longer the boy who had ridden from Winterfell. He was a predator, shaped by battle and betrayal, tempered by the knowledge of death and loss. His men followed his lead, striking with the confidence that comes from knowing their leader would not fail. By dawn, the Red Keep was nearly surrounded. Fires burned across the city, the cries of soldiers and citizens mixing with the sound of clashing steel. Robb paused atop the steps of the keep, looking over the chaos he had created. The city had resisted, but resistance was crumbling. His army, disciplined and fearless, had taken control of the streets, and soon the throne would be within reach. Yet, even as victory seemed close, Robb felt the tension tighten in his chest. The city had many secrets, many dangers yet unseen, and he knew Cersei would not surrender easily. The Red Keep loomed above Robb Stark as he stepped onto its steps, the fires of the city casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. The streets behind him were quiet now, the sounds of battle fading as his soldiers secured the city. But the heart of the war remained inside the keep. Cersei Lannister was waiting, and Robb knew she would not give up her crown easily. She was clever, ruthless, and full of venomous pride. He entered the main hall cautiously, his sword drawn but ready to be lowered. The room was silent except for the crackle of torches and the soft shuffle of guards who had been taken prisoner or fled. At the far end, the Queen stood, regal and defiant, her golden hair catching the torchlight. Her eyes were sharp, full of anger, and her lips curled in a sneer that tried to mask fear. "So, the boy wolf comes to claim the throne," she said, her voice steady, though the tension in the room betrayed her. Robb did not answer immediately. He studied her, weighing every word and expression. "I am not a boy," he said finally, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. "And I did not come to claim, but to end what should have ended long ago. Westeros cannot thrive under your lies and cruelty." Cersei laughed softly, a sound meant to wound and provoke. "And you think you are fit to rule?" she asked. "You, who have never known the quiet of peace, who has only seen death and war." Her eyes flicked to his sword, then back to him. "I have survived treachery, rebellion, and even my enemy's hands. You will not be the one to take it from me." Robb stepped closer, feeling the cold stone beneath his boots, the tension in the room rising like the tide. "Survival does not mean rule," he said. "It means hiding in fear, and fear cannot lead a kingdom." He gestured to his men, who had followed him into the hall, their eyes sharp and ready. "I offer you a choice. Step down, and your life will be spared. Refuse, and this hall will run red before the morning sun." The Queen's face twisted in rage. She reached for a hidden dagger, but Robb's hand was faster. In a blur of motion, he disarmed her and stepped forward, pressing the flat of his sword against her chest. The hall was silent, the air thick with tension. His men waited, knowing the moment could decide everything. Robb could feel his own heart pounding, but his resolve was absolute. The time for words had ended. Cersei hesitated, her pride battling with the instinct to survive. Finally, with a sharp exhale, she stepped back and dropped the dagger. "You may have the city," she spat, "but the throne is mine by right." Robb shook his head slowly. "Rights are written in blood, but rule is earned," he said, "and today I claim both." He lowered his sword, signaling to his men to stand down from immediate attack. The Queen's remaining guards bowed reluctantly, and for the first time the hall was silent, except for the crackling torches and the faint sounds of the city beyond. Robb climbed the steps of the Iron Throne slowly, his eyes fixed on the twisted metal seat of power. Every dent, every scar on it told the story of ambition, betrayal, and death. He ran a hand across the cold steel, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. The throne was more than a seat. It was a symbol of authority, of danger, and of the cost of power, and now it belonged to him. But as he sat, the reality of the responsibility hit him like a hammer. Victory in battle had been clear, but ruling Westeros would be far more complicated. Loyalties were fragile, whispers of rebellion would grow, and enemies both seen and unseen would test him every day. Robb realized that his war was not over, it had only evolved. He was not just the boy wolf anymore. He was the young king of Westeros, a title that carried more danger than glory. And as the first light of dawn crept through the windows of the Red Keep, Robb Stark, king of the North and now of all Westeros, felt the weight of the crown settle onto his shoulders. The city was his, but the kingdom would demand far more than swords to conquer. The wolf had claimed the throne, but the true battle for rule, loyalty, and survival was just beginning. The morning after Robb Stark claimed the Iron Throne, King's Landing felt like a city holding its breath. The fires from the battle had died down, leaving scorched streets and frightened citizens who peeked from behind shuttered windows. Soldiers marched through the city keeping order, while Robb walked the streets himself, feeling the weight of his crown with every step. Victory in war had been one thing, but ruling a city and eventually a kingdom was something far heavier. Robb soon learned that winning the throne did not guarantee loyalty. Lords who had once sworn allegiance to the Lannisters now whispered behind closed doors, unsure if the young wolf would protect them or punish them. Some were brave enough to approach him, offering counsel or pledges of service, while others plotted in silence, waiting for a chance to strike. The wolf realized quickly that trust would be his most valuable weapon and his most dangerous vulnerability. The first rebellion came from within the city itself. Certain guilds and minor lords, loyal to Cersei, attempted to reclaim key districts during the night. Robb's scouts warned him just in time. He acted swiftly, leading a small contingent of soldiers to intercept the insurgents in the narrow streets. Fighting in the city was messy and chaotic. Every alley could hide an ambush, and every corner offered a trap. But Robb's experience in the Riverlands had hardened him. With careful commands and a steady presence, he crushed the rebellion before it could gain momentum, leaving the leaders captured and the rest too frightened to rise again. Even with these victories, the city remained tense. Robb knew that the people's loyalty could not be bought with fear alone. He began holding audiences in the streets, listening to complaints, settling disputes, and making small reforms that won him quiet admiration. Markets were reopened under strict protection. Basic law was enforced evenly, and promises were made to rebuild areas destroyed in the fighting. Slowly, the people began to whisper his name with hope, not just fear. The wolf was learning the art of ruling, and it required patience, intelligence, and careful calculation. But threats came from beyond the city as well. Word arrived that other regions, seeing the young king's rise, were testing the limits of his power. Some lords in the Riverlands and the Vale refused to send tribute, claiming their loyalty was conditional. Others in the Westerlands began preparing private armies, hoping to take advantage of any weakness. Robb realized that holding King's Landing was one thing, but holding Westeros as a whole would be far more dangerous. Every decision, every show of strength or mercy could tip the balance between obedience and rebellion. Robb relied on Tyrion, now a reluctant advisor, to navigate the political minefield. The dwarf's knowledge of the court of spies, of alliances, and betrayals proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered plots, intercepted secret messages, and countered the schemes of ambitious lords who underestimated the wolf. Robb learned quickly that cunning and strategy were as vital as swords and shields. One wrong word, one misplaced trust, and the throne he had fought for could crumble. At night, alone in the Red Keep, Robb stared at the Iron Throne and considered the cost of his victories. His body ached from battle, but his mind ached even more from the constant scheming and vigilance required to hold power. He remembered the faces of the men and women who had fought for him, the sacrifices that had built his rise. Every choice now had to honor them while keeping the kingdom intact. The wolf had won the war, but the struggle for peace and stability was only beginning. Robb also thought of his family, still in the north and the Riverlands. Their safety weighed heavily on him, and he knew he could not neglect the heart of his kingdom while ruling the capital. Letters were sent, trusted men dispatched, and measures put in place to ensure loyalty and protection. A king could not allow distance to weaken bonds. Every corner of Westeros needed to feel his presence, his authority, and his fairness, or else rebellion would follow. By the end of the month, Robb had consolidated power in King's Landing, crushed minor rebellions, and begun weaving a network of spies and allies to monitor the kingdom. Yet even in victory, he sensed danger lurking everywhere. The crown was heavy, the people unpredictable, and enemies hidden in every shadow. He realized that claiming the Iron Throne was only the beginning of a long, perilous journey, one that would test his strength, his mind, and the wolf within him more than any battlefield ever had. The summer sun scorched King's Landing, but the heat could not match the tension that gripped the city. Robb Stark, now fully recognized as king, had learned that ruling Westeros required more than courage and cunning. It demanded ruthlessness. Whispers of rebellion had grown louder, particularly from lords in the Westerlands and the Vale, who refused to pay tribute and openly questioned his right to rule. Robb knew that hesitation would be fatal. The wolf could not allow disobedience to fester. The first reports came in the dead of night. Small bands of armed men had taken villages along the roads leading to King's Landing. They burned supplies, killed anyone loyal to the crown, and sent messages mocking the young king. Robb's commanders pressed for caution, worried about committing the army too far from the city. But Robb's eyes were cold and hard. Hesitation had killed too many of his men in the past. "We strike now," he said. "Strike fast, strike hard, and let everyone know that rebellion carries a price." He led a mounted force out of the city, moving quickly through the roads that twisted between hills and forests. The rebel lords had expected hesitation. They thought the boy wolf would be afraid to act, but Robb's army descended on them with brutal efficiency. Villages that had sheltered rebels were destroyed and their leaders executed swiftly, their heads displayed on pikes along the roads as a warning. It was a cruel tactic, but necessary. The message was clear. Robb Stark was no longer just a boy of the North. He was a king who would enforce his rule, and mercy could be fatal to anyone who challenged him. As the days passed, the rebellion continued, but the wolf's tactics were relentless. His army moved faster than any opponent expected, cutting off supply lines, ambushing reinforcements, and striking at night when fear was strongest. Word of his ruthlessness spread faster than the fires he left behind, and many lords and soldiers surrendered without a fight. Robb's reputation was growing not only as a victor in battle, but as a ruler who would punish betrayal with merciless precision. Fear became his ally, as important as any sword or shield. Yet even as he crushed rebellion after rebellion, Robb felt the weight of his choices. The executions, the scorched villages, the terrified faces of those who had once opposed him, all of it left a mark on his soul. He had not wanted to become cruel, but Westeros demanded strength and decisiveness. Any hesitation would be exploited, and the wolf knew that the throne could not survive weakness. He walked the line between justice and fear, trying to ensure that his actions were fair, even when they were harsh. Back in King's Landing, he faced another challenge: politics within the court. Some of his advisors whispered for moderation, warning that excessive cruelty would turn the people against him. Others pushed for further displays of power, claiming that only dominance would secure loyalty. Robb listened carefully, weighing every suggestion. He realized that leadership was a balancing act. Mercy could inspire devotion, but cruelty could command obedience. He had to wield both with precision, like a sword cutting through the chaos of human ambition. One night, as Robb sat alone in the Red Keep, he received troubling news. A group of powerful lords in the Riverlands were plotting together, forming an alliance that could threaten his hold on the throne. It was a dangerous game. If they moved first, King's Landing itself could fall. Robb knew that subtlety alone would not suffice. He had to act decisively, crushing their alliance before it could consolidate. His mind raced with strategy, spies, misinformation, and targeted strikes. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a ruler, and every decision could mean the difference between survival and death for his reign. By dawn, Robb had sent his agents to infiltrate the rebel lords' councils, spread false information, and sow distrust among them. Then he launched a sudden attack, striking their forces before they were ready. The battle was swift and devastating. Rebel leaders were killed, captured, or scattered, and the alliance disintegrated under pressure. Robb watched from a hilltop as the remnants fled, knowing that he had secured his rule for the time being. But at a cost, each life taken, each village burned, weighed on him, reminding him that power demanded sacrifices that could never be undone. As he returned to King's Landing, the city appeared calm, the streets quiet, and the people wary but obedient. Robb Stark had proven that he could not only win battles, but enforce his authority over a rebellious kingdom. Yet in the quiet moments, when the weight of the Iron Throne pressed down on his shoulders, he understood that fear alone was not enough. To rule Westeros, the wolf had to be clever, merciless, and unyielding, qualities that would define him in the years to come. The months that followed Robb Stark's conquest were harsh and unforgiving, but Westeros began to bend under his rule. The city of King's Landing, once chaotic and divided, had learned to obey the wolf. Robb had established order through a mixture of strict justice and calculated mercy, punishing those who betrayed him while rewarding those who demonstrated loyalty. Rumors of his victories and ruthless efficiency spread across the Seven Kingdoms, and even distant lords spoke his name with a mixture of awe and fear. Robb moved carefully, knowing that the peace of the kingdom was fragile. He strengthened the city's defenses, reorganized the army, and stationed trusted commanders at strategic points. Spies and informants now worked in every corner of the capital, reporting on plots before they could materialize. Even Cersei, once so cunning, was kept under close watch. Her power diminished, but her intelligence still respected. Robb did not underestimate anyone. Survival and rule were earned daily, and complacency was a danger he could not afford. The wolf also reached out to the north and the Riverlands, sending envoys and maintaining the loyalty of his home territories. Letters were written, alliances reaffirmed, and gifts sent to ensure that the lords remembered why they had pledged to him. Robb knew that holding the Iron Throne required more than fear in the capital. It required loyalty across the lands. Even those who had been hesitant or rebellious had to feel that allegiance to him was safer than defiance. Yet the price of power was ever present. Nights were sleepless, filled with thoughts of betrayal and loss. Robb often wandered the Red Keep alone, staring at the Iron Throne and remembering the friends, family, and soldiers who had died to place him there. The victories weighed heavily on him, and the faces of those lost haunted the quiet moments. He had wanted to be a just ruler, but he understood now that justice and survival were often at odds, and compromise was a dangerous luxury. Despite the weight, Robb was changing Westeros. Laws were enforced more evenly, corruption punished, and the weak were given protection under the Stark banner. Lords who had once abused peasants or acted with impunity were now accountable. And slowly, the people began to respect the wolf as not only a warrior, but as a ruler who could wield both strength and fairness. Yet fear remained an important tool, a reminder that power must be defended. The greatest test came when whispers of rebellion arose in the Stormlands, a distant but strategic region. A coalition of lords, emboldened by distance from King's Landing, attempted to challenge Robb's authority. But the young king had learned from every battle, every betrayal. He struck decisively, cutting through their forces with a combination of military strategy, espionage, and psychological warfare. Leaders were captured or executed, alliances shattered, and Westeros understood once more that Robb Stark's rule was not to be challenged lightly. Sitting once more on the Iron Throne, Robb allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The kingdom was still fractured, and danger lingered in every corner, but he had survived the trials that would have broken lesser men. He had grown from a boy into a king, hardened by loss, sharpened by battle, and tempered by the knowledge that ruling Westeros demanded both mercy and cruelty in equal measure. The wolf had conquered the Iron Throne, but he had also learned the cost of power, a burden heavier than any sword. As the sun set over King's Landing, casting a golden light across the Red Keep, Robb Stark understood something crucial. Victory in war had been only the beginning. Rule was a test without end, a delicate balance of fear, respect, loyalty, and cunning. Yet despite the danger and the sacrifices, he felt a quiet pride. The young wolf had risen where others had fallen, claimed the throne, and reshaped the Seven Kingdoms. And though the battles would never truly end, the name Robb Stark would echo through history not as the boy who died too soon, but as the king who conquered, survived, and ruled with the heart of a wolf. The kingdom was his. The Iron Throne belonged to the wolf.